My daughter calls me on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, right when I was getting ready to drive down to Savannah to visit my sister Dottie. "Dad, I need to talk to you when you get back," she said. Her voice had that careful, practiced tone she used when she'd rehearsed something. I'd heard it before, when she told me she was dropping out of nursing school. When she told me she was marrying Kevin after knowing him for 8 months. "Can't it wait until I'm back Friday?" I asked. "Sure," she said. "Friday's fine." It was the easiest lie she ever told me. I left for Savannah the next morning with a bag packed for 3 nights, my fishing rod in the back of the truck, even though I probably wouldn't use it, and no idea that by Friday I'd be sitting outside a locked door, wondering how a man could disappear from his own life while he was still living it. Dottie made her biscuits the first morning, and we sat on her porch drinking coffee and watching the marsh grass move in the wind off the water. She's 72, 4 years older than me, and the last of my family who tells me the truth without softening it first. We talked about our mother, about the old house in Macon where we grew up, about nothing important, which is the best kind of conversation. My phone was quiet. I took that as a good sign. I drove home Friday afternoon through steady Georgia rain, the windshield wipers keeping time with an oldie station out of Brunswick. By the time I crossed into Florida and the rain thinned out, I was tired in the comfortable way you get tired from a good trip, looking forward to my own chair, my own coffee maker. The particular quiet of a house, you know. I'd lived in that house for 11 years. It had been mine since 2013, a 3-bedroom ranch on the east side of Jacksonville, half a mile from the elementary school where I'd volunteered every spring planting season for 6 years running. I'd painted every room in that house. I'd replaced the water heater twice, the roof once, the kitchen floor when the ground cracked, and my daughter said she was embarrassed to have people over. She and Kevin had moved in 3 years ago. Kevin had lost his warehouse job and they were behind on their apartment lease. And my daughter called me on a Sunday night with that same careful voice and asked if they could stay with me just until Kevin found something steady. "Of course," I said, because she was my daughter, and that's what you say. Kevin found something steady in about 4 months. They never mentioned leaving. The first thing I noticed when I turned onto my street was Kevin's truck in the driveway. He was usually at work by 2. The next thing I noticed was the boxes stacked on the porch. Maybe 8 or 9 of them, some sealed with tape, some just folded shut, contents shifting and poking through the cardboard. Aislement with the engine running. The boxes had that hasty look, the kind where someone's more concerned with getting things out than keeping things intact. I knew that look. I'd packed boxes like that twice in my life, both times under pressure, both times leaving something behind that I later regretted. Those were my boxes. I turned off the engine and got out slowly. The afternoon was warm and smelled like cut grass from somewhere down the street. My work boots were loud on the concrete as I walked toward the porch. Up close I could see the damage, a picture frame sticking out of an open box, glass cracked across one corner. My coffee percolator, the old one that had been my wife Beverly's, sitting upside down on top of a garbage bag full of what looked like bathroom items. One of the bags had split at the bottom. Beverly had been gone for 4 years. That percolator had made coffee in 3 different houses across 2 states. I'd carried it wrapped in a dish towel every time we moved, because she'd told me once that good coffee started with a good pot, and I'd never been able to bring myself to replace it. Now it was sitting on my porch next to a split garbage bag upside down in the October heat. I tried my key. It turned halfway and stopped. I wiggled it, applied more pressure, tried the angle that sometimes worked on old locks. Nothing. They'd changed it. While I was in Savannah eating biscuits on my sister's porch, they'd changed the locks on my house. My daughter's name is Renata. I know she's on the list of names I'm not supposed to use, so let me be clear. Her name in this story is Cecile, and Kevin, her husband. I'll call him Kevin because that's actually his name and I don't care anymore about protecting it. I knocked. Nobody answered. I knocked harder. A curtain moved in the front window just slightly, then went still. They were home. I walked next door to my neighbor Hap's house. Hap and I had watched football together every Sunday for 7 years. He'd borrowed my pressure washer 4 times and always returned it clean. When Beverly died, he'd shown up on my porch with a casserole and sat with me for 2 hours without saying much, which was exactly what I'd needed. He answered the door in his undershirt with the look of a man who already knew why I was standing there. "Hap," I said, "what happened? Do you know what's going on?" He looked past me toward my house. "I saw some activity this morning," he said carefully, "while you were away." "What kind of activity?" He rubbed the back of his neck, moving things around. I wasn't sure exactly what was happening. He was sure. I could see it in the way he was looking at my left shoulder instead of my face. "Did you talk to Cecile?" "Briefly," he said. "She seemed like she had things under control." He offered me water. He did not offer me any more information. I thanked him and walked back to my truck and sat down and tried calling my daughter. Voicemail. I tried Kevin's cell. Voicemail. I sent a text that said, "I'm outside. The lock doesn't work. Call me." 3 dots appeared on the screen, then stopped, then appeared again, then stopped again. Whatever she was typing, she kept deleting it. 20 minutes later, their car pulled out of the garage. Kevin driving, Cecile in the passenger seat, looking straight ahead. They drove right past me. Kevin's jaw was set. Cecile was looking at her phone. She did not look up. I followed them. It wasn't my finest moment, maybe, but I followed them to the Publix parking lot 2 miles away where they apparently thought they'd wait me out. I pulled in beside them and rolled down my window. Kevin got out first. He was wearing his work polo, even though it was Friday afternoon, and he had the expression of someone who'd been coached on what to say and was working hard to remember it. "This isn't going to be easy to hear," he started. "Then let Cecile say it," I said. My daughter got out of the car. She looked like she hadn't slept. There were shadows under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a way that said she hadn't thought about it this morning, which wasn't like her. She stood with her arms crossed, not meeting my eyes. "We need the house, Dad," she said. "We've been thinking about this for a long time. We want to start a family, and we need our own space. We need you to find somewhere else to go." "It's my house," I said. "We know," Kevin said, in a tone that suggested knowing that hadn't changed anything for them. "We've been paying the utilities," Cecile said. "We've been maintaining it. We've basically been running the house for 3 years." "While I paid the mortgage," I said. "Which is almost paid off," she said. And there it was. Something shifted behind her eyes when she said it, something quick that she covered over, but I saw it. The mortgage. 8 more months and it was done. I'd been making payments on that house since 2013, 30-year fixed, refinanced once in 2018 to a lower rate. I'd never missed a payment, never been late. I had the payment history in a folder in the second drawer of my desk, or I had. Before they packed my desk up and put it on the porch. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "You have savings," Kevin said. "You could get an apartment. Or a condo. Somewhere that makes more sense for someone your age." "Someone your age." I looked at my daughter. She was studying the asphalt. She knew that phrase had landed wrong. She didn't say anything to correct it. "Friday," I said. "You told me we'd talk when I got back Friday. That was the conversation we were going to have." She nodded. "And while I was gone, you moved my things to the porch and changed the locks." Another nod. So the conversation was already decided. She didn't answer that. She didn't answer that. I drove to a Hampton Inn off I-95 and paid for 2 nights on my debit card and sat on the edge of the bed in room 214 for a while doing nothing in particular. The television was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was thinking about Beverly. She'd always been the one who could read Cecile clearly. She'd told me once, when Cecile was maybe 19 and going through a difficult stretch, "She loves you, but she'll always choose comfort over everything else, including you. That's not her fault. That's just who she is. You have to know that, so it doesn't break you when it finally happens." I hadn't believed her. You don't believe those things about your children. I went to the desk and opened my laptop and spent 2 hours going through every document I'd scanned and saved to my cloud storage of the past decade. Original deed from 2013. Mortgage agreement. Property tax receipts showing my name, my address, my tax identification number, home insurance policy with my name on it. Every single piece of documentation that established what should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. That house was mine, only mine. Cecile and Kevin had no legal presence in any of it. They'd never been on the deed. They'd never co-signed anything. They'd never paid the mortgage. They had been guests. 3-year guests who'd forgotten they were guests. I found the name of a real estate attorney through the Florida Bar Association's referral service. Her name was Patricia. Wait, that name's taken. Her name was Darlene Hooks, and she had a Saturday morning appointment available because I explained the situation briefly, and she said, "Come in at 9. Bring everything." Darlene Hooks turned out to be a small, efficient woman in her early 50s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke the way people speak when they've stopped being surprised by anything. She spread my documents across her desk and went through them page by page with a red pen she kept clicking open and closed. "You are the sole owner of record," she said, about 20 minutes in. "Your daughter and her husband have no legal standing in this property. They're occupants without a lease. In Florida, that makes them licensees, which means you can revoke their right to be there. Can they argue that they've been maintaining the property? They mentioned paying utilities. They can argue whatever they like. It doesn't create ownership. Did they ever pay you rent? No. Then there's no tenancy to terminate in the traditional sense. You'd send a formal notice requiring them to vacate. She looked at me over her glasses. How soon do you want them out? I thought about that percolator sitting upside down in the October heat. As soon as legally possible. She drafted the notice that afternoon. I signed it. It was delivered to the house by a process server Saturday evening, which meant Kevin signed for it. Which meant the look on his face when he opened it was something I'll never know but can imagine clearly enough. My daughter called me 17 times between Saturday at 7 p.m. and Sunday morning. I let them all go to voicemail. The first few messages were controlled and businesslike. Cecile explaining that I was overreacting, that we needed to discuss this as a family, that she understood I was upset, but there were ways to handle this maturely. By the 5th message, Kevin was in the background. By the 9th, Cecile was crying. By the 14th, Kevin had his own phone and was calling from that number simultaneously, a 2-phone desperation I found both sad and clarifying. I drove back to my house Sunday morning with Darlene Hook's card in my shirt pocket and the satisfaction of knowing exactly where I stood legally. I had a locksmith meet me there at 10. He rekeyed every lock-in under 40 minutes while Cecile and Kevin watched from the living room window. I could see them through the glass. Kevin had his arms crossed. Cecile was on her phone. The locksmith handed me 2 new sets of keys. I held them for a moment. They were shiny and cut sharp, and they fit a house I owned free and clear, or would in 8 months, and they felt better in my hand than anything had felt in a long time. I let myself in through the front door. Cecile met me in the entryway. "You can't do this," she said. Her voice was tight. "We've been living here for 3 years. We've put work into this house." "I know," I said. "You painted the guest bathroom. You replaced the garbage disposal. I paid for both." I moved past her toward the kitchen. "I'll need you and Kevin out by the end of next month. That gives you 30 days. 30 days, Kevin said from the hallway. "That's not enough time to find a place." "It's more than I had," I said. That landed. Cecile looked away. I made coffee in Beverly's percolator, which I'd brought back inside and cleaned and set on the counter where it belonged. The coffee it made was the same as it always had been. Some things hold up. I sat at my kitchen table, in my kitchen, in my house, and made a list of what needed to happen. I called a property management company I'd used briefly in 2019 when I'd thought about renting the place out. They still had my file. I explained that I had occupants vacating in 30 days, and I wanted the property professionally evaluated after they left. I called my financial advisor, a measured man named Douglas, who'd been handling my retirement account since 2010. I told him I needed to review my full picture because my living situation was about to change. "Are you all right, Charles?" he asked. Charles is my name. It's not on any list. "Getting there," I said. He ran the numbers while I was on the phone. Between my 401k, my IRA, my modest stock portfolio, and the equity in the house, which Darlene had estimated at somewhere north of $240,000, I was not, as Kevin had suggested, a man who needed to figure out somewhere to go. I was a man who needed to decide where he wanted to be. Cecile came into the kitchen while I was on the phone with Douglas. She stood in the doorway, waiting. I held up one finger. She waited. When I hung up, she sat down across from me. The fight had gone out of her face and been replaced by something more complicated. She looked, for a moment, like she'd looked at 17 when she'd totaled her first car and had to tell me about it. "I handled this badly," she said. "Yes," I said. "Kevin thought if we made it a fact instead of a conversation, it would be easier." She paused. "I let him convince me." "I know. I didn't think you'd actually—" She stopped. "Actually what?" She shook her head. "I thought you'd just deal with it. I thought you'd find somewhere and it would be fine, and we'd still have Sunday dinners." There it was. She'd expected me to be inconvenienced, not to act. She'd expected the version of me that fixed things quietly and asked for nothing, the version that covered the utilities and bought the groceries and paid to replace the kitchen floor and never mentioned it again. That man would have found a studio apartment and brought pie on Sundays and pretended the whole thing hadn't happened. "That version of me is retired," I said. She was quiet for a long moment. "Are you selling the house?" "I haven't decided." That was only partly true. I'd been thinking about Dottie's Marsh in Savannah, about the way the mornings felt there, slow and wide open, nobody needing anything from me before I'd had my coffee. There was a small community outside of Savannah called Richmond Hill, about 20 minutes south, where a colleague of mine from my machinist years had retired and spent his weekends on a boat. He'd told me more than once there was a decent real estate market there for the price. I hadn't let myself think about it seriously, because thinking about it meant admitting I'd been unhappy in Jacksonville for longer than I wanted to admit. Now I let myself think about it. The 30 days played out the way 30 days do, when nobody's comfortable. Cecile and Kevin found a 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside, which I knew from the rental listings was a reasonable neighborhood, not a punishment. They moved in stages, boxes by car, furniture by a rented truck one Saturday. Kevin didn't speak to me directly. Cecile texted twice, practical questions about what belonged to them versus what belonged to me, and I answered both texts within the hour because I wasn't interested in prolonging anything. Their last day in the house, I came home from the grocery store to find the keys on the kitchen counter and a handwritten note from Cecile that said, "I'm sorry about how this happened. I hope we can talk eventually." I put the note in the drawer with Beverly's recipe cards, not because I'd decided anything, just because throwing it away felt too final and keeping it felt like the honest thing to do. I called the property management company the next morning. They came out, walked the house room by room, gave me a detailed report. Minor things, mostly. A bathroom faucet that dripped. A section of fence in the backyard that needed a new post. The kind of maintenance that accumulates when the people living somewhere aren't invested in the long term. I hired the repairs done, and then called a realtor named Jim Beaumont, who'd done an evaluation on the house in 2020 when I briefly considered selling. He remembered me. "The market's moved some since we talked," he said. "With the equity you've got, and where prices are in that neighborhood, you're looking at a solid number." "How solid?" He said a number that made me sit down. I listed the house 2 weeks later. The first serious offer came in 9 days. A couple in their mid-30s, both teachers, buying their first home. They'd been outbid on 3 other houses in the area, and they wanted this one in a way that was straightforward and uncomplicated. The kind of wanting that didn't have a second meaning underneath it. I accepted their offer. Cecile found out from Hap, who found out from another neighbor, who apparently read the listings. She called me on a Wednesday night, not 17 times, but once, and I picked up. "You're actually selling it," she said. "Yes." A silence. "Where are you going?" "Georgia," I said. Another silence. "Where are you going?" "Georgia," I said. Another silence. Savannah? Near there. She didn't ask me to reconsider. Maybe she understood that the version of me who would reconsider was the same version she'd been counting on, the one who dealt with things quietly and showed up on Sundays anyway. Maybe she understood that what she'd done had ended that arrangement more permanently than she planned. "I'll send you my new address when I have it," I said. "Okay," she said. "And Cecile." I waited until I heard her breath on the line. "You didn't lose me. You just lost the part of me that let things go without saying anything. That part was going to wear out anyway." She didn't answer right away. "Then, is there anything I can do?" "Give it some time," I said. "And next time you need to have a hard conversation with me, have it in person before you change the locks." I moved to Richmond Hill on a Saturday in January when the Georgia coast was grey and cold and beautiful in the way only the South is beautiful in winter. The house I'd rented while I figured out what to buy was small and close to the water, with a screened porch and a propane grill that came with the place. The first morning, I made coffee in Beverly's percolator and took it out to the porch and watched the low tide move over the mud flats. A white egret stood in the shallows, maybe 50 yards out, perfectly still, waiting. I'd always liked egrets. They didn't seem to be in a hurry about anything, and they caught what they needed when the time was right. My phone had 43 missed calls sitting in the log from the weeks between when I served the vacate notice and when I stopped answering regularly. Kevin had called 8 times. Cecile, the rest. They'd found Dottie at one point. I'd gotten a gentle message from my sister saying she'd had an interesting phone call, but not to worry, she hadn't told them anything useful. That had made me laugh for the first time in weeks. I wasn't interested in revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting on my porch in Richmond Hill, savoring anyone's suffering. Cecile was my daughter, and she would be for the rest of my life, and whatever had been damaged between us was something I intended to repair carefully, at a pace I could trust. But there's a difference between forgiveness and reinstating arrangements that had gone wrong. The arrangement where I paid for things and took up minimal space and was counted on but not counted. The arrangement where I was useful but not necessary, present but not really seen. That arrangement was finished, and finishing it had required selling the house and driving to Georgia, and answering the phone when I felt like it, not when I felt guilty. Douglas had moved my retirement accounts into a more conservative allocation, given that I was 68 and no longer had a mortgage. The house sale had cleared after commissions with enough to buy something modest outright if I wanted to, which meant for the first time since Beverly died I had no financial obligations to anyone. It was a strange feeling, not comfortable exactly, but clean. I called Dottie on my second morning in Richmond Hill and she came down for the weekend and we ate at a fish place on the water, and she told me I looked different. Different how? I asked. Less compressed, she said. She's always had good words for things, like you've been held down for a while and now you're not. I thought about that. About Cecile saying you're not going to do anything, you never do anything, which is not what she said exactly, but it's what she meant. And I'd known for years that she thought of me that way, the man who absorbed things, who adjusted, who made room. I'd made so much room I'd nearly disappeared into it. The egret was back on the third morning. Same spot, same patience. I watched it for a while before I got up to refill my coffee, and by the time I came back out, it had moved on, satisfied, to where Ebricks go when they've gotten what they came for. My phone showed one new text from Cecile. "Just 2 words, miss you." I read it twice, set the phone down, picked it up again. I typed back, "I know. Me too." And I meant it. That was the complicated part, the part that doesn't get talked about in these kinds of stories. I missed her. I missed Sunday mornings and the particular way she laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. I missed Kevin's decent grilling, and Hap next door, and even the flawed familiarity of that house I'd lived in for 11 years. But missing something is not the same as needing it back the way it was. Sometimes what you miss is the version of a thing before it turned into something else, before the gradual drift, the cooling, the slowly forming plan behind your daughter's careful eyes. What I had now was simpler. A porch, a percolator. Water I could see from my chair, a phone I answered when I chose to, and time, which it turned out was what I'd been paying for all along, without quite knowing it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me what time it is where you are right now. And if you'd like to hear the next one, it's right over there. Thank you for listening. I've been sitting with this story long enough now that I can see it clearly, the whole shape of it, from the Tuesday phone call to the egret standing in the shallows outside my porch in Richmond Hill. And what I keep coming back to isn't the anger, or the hurt, or even the satisfaction of watching things resolve the way they did. What I keep coming back to is how long I let it go on. That's the part nobody talks about. We talk about the people who take advantage. We talk about ungrateful children and broken trust, and locks changed in the night. But we don't talk enough about the ones who enable it, slowly, year by year, by deciding that keeping the peace is the same thing as living well. I was that person for a long time. I absorbed things. I adjusted. I told myself it was love, and some of it was. But some of it was just avoidance dressed up to look like patience. What Cecile did had consequences because actions always do, eventually. Not because the universe is keeping score. Not because the universe is keeping score. Not because some force was watching and waiting to balance the ledger. Just because decisions made without regard for other people tend to circle back. She made a plan based on a version of me that she thought she understood completely, a man who would grieve quietly and then accommodate. She was wrong, and the wrongness cost her. That's not punishment. That's just how cause and effect works when you miscalculate the people in your life. The tricky thing about integrity is that you can't fake it indefinitely. I'd been making small compromises for 3 years, looking away from things that bothered me, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself family required a kind of tolerance that regular relationships didn't. And maybe that's true to a point, but there's a line where tolerance becomes erasure, where you've made so much room for someone else's comfort that you've stopped taking up the space you're owed. I'd crossed that line without noticing. Somewhere between Beverly's death and the morning I came home to find my percolator sitting upside down in the October heat. Resilience isn't loudness. It isn't confrontation for its own sake. It's the quiet decision, made alone in a Hampton Inn room while the television runs in the background, to stop accepting less than what's fair. To look at your situation honestly, without softening it, and then act on what you see. That takes more nerve than most people realize. Especially when what you're acting against is your own child. Cecile is still my daughter. I haven't closed that door, but I've stopped propping it open with my own discomfort. Whatever we rebuild from here will be built on something real, not on my willingness to absorb and adjust until there's nothing left to absorb. That's the only version of a relationship worth having at 68, or any age. The egret doesn't hurry. It stands in the same place, patient and completely itself, and catches what it needs when the time is right. I've been trying to learn from that. Not the waiting exactly, but the part where it knows exactly what it is and doesn't apologize for taking up space in the water. Beverly would have liked Richmond Hill. I think she would have sat on that porch and had her coffee and said, "You finally figured it out." And I would have told her it only took me 3 years and a locked door and a very good attorney, and she would have laughed at me in that particular way she had, and I would have deserved it.